I'm really excited about this camera, the D750.
Now you sound too like unexcited.
I'm so excited about this camera.
First, I'd like to give a shout out to Sammy's Camera, who's sponsoring these segments here on the Slanted Lens Now, our camera reviews. Great place to be able to pick up any of these cameras. Check them out in our links below so you can purchase their stuff online and support the Slanted Lens here. We appreciate that.
I'm really excited about this camera. The D750 was a really popular Nikon camera. It had a few problems though, and it's pretty old, so they've updated it. The D780 now. It's got all of their top of the line. I mean, it is an entry-level camera. It's not the D850, so it's 24 megapixels, but it has really nice processor, great phase detect autofocus system. It has the eye detect and everything like that now. And it has all of the video features that you would find in the Z6. They moved that over, even though it's a DSLR. So it's really, this is kind of like the nicest video DSLR you might find on the market now.
So I understand the A7 III, why it competes with this camera, price-wise. It's in the same category, full-frame camera. But why the 5D Mark IV?
I personally felt like the Mark IV was a little bit more of a comparison, even though technically it's supposed to be their more flagship.
I think this is the competitive camera with this range. If you're going to make a decision, and financially you're in that same ballpark.
Over $2,000.
Yeah, over $2,000. I think you're going to choose between these three cameras. So let's get into this. Take a look at picture quality, and then we'll just go through the dynamic range. We'll take a look at the video capabilities. Let's just look at all those things and get started. So let's get to it. I love Canon color, but I think I love Nikon color as much or more. And
really?
Yeah, I've always, the D850 is one of my favorite cameras as far as look goes, and this
really
camera feels similar to me.
So I feel like the Sony, I mean, it's underexposing, but that does mean it does save some of the highlights. You know, maybe her hair, her shirt isn't quite as hot.
Yeah.
Might have more detail there in the end.
Yeah.
If we look at sharpness, so with the sharpness here, we are looking at resolution a little bit, but really it's about the lens. The lens is going to really decide the sharpness of each image. The Canon is looking pretty sharp. And we use the 1.2 on that, which is it's an okay lens. It seems a little old at this point. I feel like it needs an update.
It's not as old as an Nikon.
That's true. That's true. The Sony's lens built by ZEISS is really nice.
Yeah.
That's always been a great lens. I love the build on that.
Yeah.
So as far as picture quality goes, they all look really nice. I think the Canon and the Nikon are more to my liking out of the box, just because they're a little brighter. I like the tonality more, less green too.
Yep. It's like same as we always see.
Yeah.
You could correct that image though, Sony, in about 3 seconds.
Absolutely.
Make it look like the Canon.
Absolutely. Okay, so the dynamic range test. As we said, we start here at 0 EV, that is proper exposure, and we've metered off of her face. She's in the shadow, which means there's direct sunlight on the brick building behind her. We also have the sky, which is a good indicator of how the highlight is holding, but her face is properly exposed with an incident meter.
Right off the bat, I mean, look how the Sony holds the wall on the left-hand side.
Well, I mean, what it comes down to is the Sony's just less sensitive, I think. So at the same ISO, the highlights are going to be brighter, more blown out on the other cameras than they are on the Sony. Here at -1, we're looking now like the sky is looking nice on all the cameras.
Yeah.
So again, if you're shooting the Nikon or the Canon, maybe you just underexpose by one stop. Just compensate for all of your images so you can keep those highlights if you have something bright in the scene, so you can make sure you keep that detail. -2 stops. Again, just looking to see when the noise starts to come in, because we are pushing the exposure back up to be proper. The Nikon's looking really clean.
It is.
At -2 stops. I am seeing noise on the Canon and even more on the Sony. Her face is starting to get kind of blotchy.
Yeah, look at the color, how the color has stayed on each of them.
So -3 stops. The Nikon has really beautiful tonality, even when it's underexposed. I just love the way that her face is popping, and the color is really coming out in her skin. I feel like the skin on the other images is starting to get a little more muted.
Boy, look at the yellow that starts to creep in the shadows, or no, on the highlight side of her face there.
And yeah, we are definitely seeing grain. The Nikon's staying pretty clean. Even -4, the Sony's definitely gone green. If you look at the shadows, like the brick wall and stuff, you're seeing some green and yellow shift, and there's a lot of noise.
Major noise on the Sony.
On her face. And even the Canon's got a lot of noise, but that Nikon.
Surprises me that Nikon is held together as well as it has for 4 stops. This is -4 stops.
+1 stop. Highlights, of course, were already kind of blown, so we're seeing those just white out completely. The Sony is even blowing the sky and the brick and everything now. But her face, which is what we're really measuring for, is staying just fine on all of these. And overall, there isn't too much color shift in the chart or even on the brick and stuff, just in the really blown out areas of the image. Here at +2 stops, the Nikon looks like it's going to be the first one to go. But if you look at her nose and her forehead, there are these little hot spots that are starting to appear. And I guess it is the same here with the Canon too, and the Canon is turning super yellow on her skin.
Super yellow.
Yeah. The color checker is looking nice and rich on the Canon and the Sony. Nikon seems a little washed, but all right, +3 stop. All the cameras at this point are starting to fall apart. The Sony is finally hitting its breaking point, I think. You're getting that yellow, clippy sort of tonality.
But it seems like it's held on almost the best as far as going this way. I mean, at +3 stops.
Definitely +3
for a digital
stops.
camera, that's a long ways.
And I have to say, in the past, we've shot other Nikon cameras that were kind of starting to go at +1 stop. So this is already an improvement.
Yeah, major improvement.
And then +4 stops, of course, they're all looking really bad. The conclusion here is, I think the Nikon held it together really well. I mean, we had 1, 2-ish stops of latitude in the highlights, and then you had at least 4, if not 5, maybe 6 stops of latitude in the shadows.
This is a major step up for Nikon, I think. I really feel like the sensor and the look is really incredible. These 3 cameras are so head-to-head with each other. It's tough. A difficult decision. So our autofocus test is pretty interesting because we did this in deeper in the shade this time, which is a little more difficult for cameras because they struggle in that low contrast. So the Canon has an older technology. It doesn't have the dual pixels, so it's an older technology. And it struggled a little bit. I mean, it wasn't terrible.
It wasn't terrible, but there's definitely a point where it kind of loses it for 3 or 4 or 5 images and then has to grab it
Was
again.
it that many, 3 or 4?
It was 3 or 4.
Although I was super impressed with the Sony. The Sony seemed to be pretty much right on. We lost a frame or 2 out of the whole test in each one that we did. It was really incredible.
And even the ones that were sharp were sharper too. The eye detect was more reliable for the Sony than it was for the Canon and the Nikon.
They were sharp, right on with the Sony.
Yeah.
The Nikon, though, did actually much better than we've seen in the past. It seems like this one was pretty on as far as the autofocus. Am I wrong in that?
No, I think you're right. It wasn't spectacular, but it was very good.
Yeah.
I think it was maybe a little slightly better than the Canon.
We're looking at this from a perfection point of view. Like, we'd love to see every one of these images spot right on.
Yeah.
And the Sony was the closest to accomplishing that, but the other 2 were not that far behind.
Yeah, not at all. All right, the ISO test. Canon's a little hotter than the others.
It is.
And the Sony's a little darker. 400 ISO on a camera in 2020, we shouldn't see any noise. At 800 ISO, you do see a little noise starting to appear. Yeah, you see a little noise kind of around her right eye near her hair. Nikon's looking really clean. Canon, a little bit of noise. Sony, a little bit of noise. Moving to 1600 ISO, Nikon is looking clean, man. The Sony's, the color is like shifting a tiny bit in the deep shadows.
And we're starting to get a little bit of blotch in the skin, just a little bit, although I feel like I'm seeing that a little bit in the Nikon as well.
The Canon, definitely some noise around her eyes, but the tonality of the image on the Canon is staying very consistent overall. It seems like Nikon's in the lead, followed by the Canon and then the Sony.
Yeah.
3200 ISO. Nikon is still looking good. I mean, you do have noise, starting to lose detail, still looking good. Sony's getting dark, it's getting grainy.
And the color shifting.
The color shifting. Canon's getting a little bit noisy.
6400, now we have problems across the board, really.
The color on the Canon still looks really nice, even at these high ISOs. But you are seeing a lot of noise in the shadows.
I'm impressed with the Nikon. It seems like overall is holding, the color's holding, yeah.
And that's what we expect from Nikon usually, is you shoot any ISO and you're gonna get the same image with just, a little more noise.
Yeah.
12,800, very gritty. In my opinion, the Nikon's finally kind of starting to look unusable.
Yep.
Sony's looking really bad.
Really bad.
Dark and green and muddy.
Yep.
The Canon, it almost seems like the image is getting brighter.
It does, like the contrast is building or something.
Super noisy on the Canon. And of course, the Canon is the only one that goes to 25,600.
And
looks like a
why exactly would they do that?
Pointless painting. Let's go to 1600 on the Nikon.
Yeah, I think 1600 on the Nikon is going to feel very similar to the 800. So there's like a stop you have there.
Yes, I would say a stop advantage for the Nikon across the board in terms of performance. Not to mention the color consistency, the tonality consistency.
These are all shot at the same settings.
Yeah, they're all shot at the same settings, no adjustments made in post.
Yep.
That's interesting. I like that Nikon. I think it's a real
We're
winner.
sounding like Nikon fanboys today.
Yeah, well, which is funny
Which
because
neither of us own.
neither of us have ever owned a Nikon.
Well, I did in film days. Oh yeah.
Trader. Our final test here, the video test. So these are all just shot standard picture profile, out of the box, if you just kind of wanted to point your camera and shoot.
And if you're wondering why the Canon is as large as it is, because it has a crop factor.
It has a crop factor, a major crop factor when you're shooting 4K. Yeah. There is some more on the Nikon, which I'm not seeing on the others.
Oh yeah, you're right.
But it looks like a clear image. I mean, they're all actually remarkably similar. I will say, in the past when we've shot Nikon, they've looked overly contrasty to the point where it looks bad, and this isn't that way.
These three pictures all look very clean and very similar. You didn't make any color correction on these, did you?
No, these are straight out of the box.
Yeah, they look.
So, I mean, there's the image, and you immediately see the big disadvantage for the Canon, and that is it has a major crop factor in 4K, and it doesn't output a file that's great.
I know this isn't a dynamic range test, but it is interesting to note the wall in the background at these exposures, because the wall on the Sony is starting to blow out, and it's holding fairly well on the Nikon. It's holding well, and it's holding really well on the Canon. Although that crop factor is hard to tell.
And also picture profile. If you just shot in a more neutral picture profile on the Sony, you'll
change everything.
You shoot an S-Log. But between those three, I would pick the Sony, because if I were presented with those three cameras as options for a particular shoot, I would be wanting the one that's the one that shoots the best image internally without building it out too much. And that's going to be.
If you're going to have it on a gimbal or something, you're not going to have to run all that other stuff. You don't have to. So, but I love the Canon for a lot of reasons. The color I love. I actually love the Sony in different ways. The compactness of that mirrorless platform is fabulous to me. But I've been super impressed with the Nikon. I have always, every time we've reviewed one of the Nikons, I've loved the color. And I think their video has come a long ways. I think we're seeing much better video capabilities with this new camera. And if you're in that world and that's what you shoot, you're going to want to look at this camera, and it could be a B camera to your 850. It could be, a lot of different options. And getting that 10-bit 422 out, to me, is huge.
What's interesting is that Sony is pushing the idea that mirrorless is the future. That, I think in Sony's vision, in 50 years, there will be no DSLRs. Maybe that's true. But it is interesting that a Nikon comes out with a 780. I think the 780 is probably the most compelling DSLR to come out in years.
Yeah.
And so the fact that that's still competing with mirrorless cameras is pretty cool.
Yeah, it is. That's still hanging in there. All right, so three great cameras. Hope you enjoyed the information you got here for the Slanted Lens. You can check out the stuff at Sammy's if you want to check this out with our affiliate program there at Sammy's Camera, or if you want to go into Sammy's and take a look at the cameras there, you certainly can do that, and they'd love to be able to help you in any way they can. So thanks for joining us, and keep those cameras rolling.
And keep on clicking.